All right, welcome back to Fundamentals of Philosophy. This is Module 4 on the philosophy of mind. For those of you on the psychology degree track, this may be especially useful or interesting information, hopefully. My goal for this lecture is for it to be shorter than the previous one, which came in a little long, so I'm going to stick more closely to my notes, and hopefully that'll help us bring it in on time. So let's jump into it. This module is about technologies, music, and ghosts. Philosophy functions as a technology, deploying logic, conceptual analysis, dialectical reasoning, scientific inquiry, and rational introspection as precise instruments toward the construction of ever more sophisticated tools. It operates as a self-correcting algorithm, thinking folded back upon itself, analyzing its own structure, probing for ruptures in the conceptual scaffolding that binds the world together. We assume, mechanically, uncritically, that our experience corresponds to an external reality, that the future will continue to resemble the past. Yet we've seen that even these foundations are shot through with contradiction and uncertainty. These next two modules venture into metaphysics, what Aristotle termed the study of being qua being, examining the fundamental nature and structure of reality itself. And we begin with that most ghost-haunted of inquiries, the examination of human consciousness, where technology, spectrality, and the music of experience converge. The story of consciousness is, in many ways, a ghost story, one beginning with Descartes' immaterial thinking substance and extending through Gilbert Ryle's critique of the ghost in the machine. Consciousness is at once the most familiar and the most mysterious of phenomena. We know our minds most intimately, and yet we know them not at all. Each mind exists as an isolated universe of sensation and imagination, a private haunting that we navigate in fundamental solitude. We remain locked away from other minds by what Thomas Nagel calls the irreducible gap between first-person experience and third-person observation. In our experience of consciousness, we are all alone together. For billions of years, there were no minds to know. The universe existed as inert, unthinking matter, blindly obeying the laws of entropy. Then, for one unimaginably brief moment, fragments of matter began thinking, questioning, and composing symphonies. When this brief flame flickers out, will the universe return to the still darkness of unobserved matter, or does something of the ghost remain? To answer this, we must first determine what sort of ghost we're dealing with. This module explores three fundamental questions within the philosophy of mind. First, mind-body interaction. How can consciousness be simultaneously dependent upon and distinct from the physical body? Second, the hard problem of consciousness. How can subjective experience emerge within an objectively describable world? And third, artificial intelligence. How might we distinguish between genuine consciousness and its simulation? When Descartes split the world into an extended substance and a thinking substance, he created a sanctuary for the soul, protecting it from the encroaching mechanism of the new science. But the cost was steep. We became ghosts drifting through the Cartesian theater, forever separated from the material world we inhabit. Consider what happens when music begins playing through the unseen speakers of this theater. From the third-person perspective of scientific observation, the vibration of a guitar string creates mechanical compression waves in the air, which trigger an electrochemical cascade through your auditory nerve. But inside the theater, there are no pressure waves or neural firings. There is only the foreboding quality of a descending riff, the beauty of a melody, or the visceral impact of a drum. A gap seems to exist between the objective physics of sound and the subjective experience of music. Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia was the first to recognize this fundamental paradox in Descartes' dualism. How can a non-extended mental thing which possesses no mass or position in space actually influence physical reality? An immaterial substance cannot transmit or exert any force or impulse. Those are exclusively physical properties. This general problem of how an immaterial mind can interact with a physical body is known as the mind-body problem. Descartes' answer, that the mind and body are connected at the pineal gland, merely relocates the problem rather than resolving it. The gap remains between the theater and the world, an ontological rupture that demands reconciliation. And the problem doesn't end with music. Imagine raising your arm to wave at a friend across a crowded room. In that brief moment between intention and action, an abyss appears. How does an immaterial thought translate into a mechanical cascade of muscle contractions and neural firings? One strategy dualists employ to avoid this interaction problem is rejecting Descartes' substance dualism in favor of property dualism. Recall that a substance is the fundamental essence of a thing that persists through time, while properties are changeable characteristics grounded in substances, like the shape and smell of Descartes' wax. Property dualists reject the claim of two types of substance. Instead, they argue there is only physical matter. But under certain circumstances, physical matter can give rise to non-physical mental properties. Property dualism is thus a compromise between physicalism and substance dualism. To explain consciousness arising from neural activity, property dualists invoke a principle known as emergence, which describes how certain complex systems generate novel, higher-order properties. There are two types of emergence. Weak emergence, which refers to uncontroversial cases where emergent properties can be explained by underlying physical facts. To give an example, the wetness of water is absent in both hydrogen and oxygen atoms individually. Yet water is wet. It exemplifies a weakly emergent property. It's novel, it's new. Yet it's theoretically predictable from an analysis of its components. Right? No one is surprised that water is wet, even though hydrogen and oxygen aren't themselves wet. Strong emergence has more controversial implications. A strongly emergent property cannot be explained from an analysis of its parts. It represents a genuine ontological break in the continuity of nature. Property dualists typically endorse this stronger claim, strong emergence, considering mind to be a strongly emergent property that is irreducible to physical facts. Even if we mapped every atom of the brain, that would bring us no closer to understanding consciousness. So returning to the raising of the arm, property dualists describe this as a straightforward case of a mental property, your intention to raise your arm, causing a bodily response, the raising of the arm. The emergent mental state, the intention to raise the arm, produces activity in the body through a process called downward causation. But property dualists still need a mechanism to connect the mental states with their physical underpinnings, right? The principle of supervenience fills this role by stipulating that higher order changes must correspond to underlying physical changes. So your intention to raise your arm supervenes upon specific neural firings. No neural firings, no raising of the arm. But this creates a problem. Both the mental intention and the neural firing seem individually sufficient to explain the arm raising. So which one is the actual cause? Which one is the sufficient condition? Two principles suggest that the neurons are what are doing the actual work. First is the causal closure of the physical, which is a scientific principle which states that every physical effect has a sufficient physical cause. In this closed system of nature, nothing remains for a non-physical cause to accomplish. There's nothing left for it to do. Second is the nature of supervenience itself, the supervenience relationship, which stipulates that mental changes depend upon physical changes. So neural firings, the firing of the neurons, appear to account for both the mental intention and the physical outcome of raising the arm at the same time. So the higher order mental state, the intention, seems to be causally excluded, to use Jaegwon Kim's term, from affecting the physical world. Our mental states are left with no actual function. They've got no work to do. They've got no role to play. They are mere byproducts of brain activity, spectators to actions predetermined by physical determination and causation. Mind is just along for the ride. This is a conclusion known as epiphenomenalism, and it appears to a lot of people to be both absurd and kind of horrifying. It threatens our notions of free will and agency, topics that we'll return to and explore more deeply in Module 5. So despite these problems, Descartes' substance dualism became something like the default position within Western theology, science, and philosophy for hundreds of years. As we saw in Module 3, not even the empiricists managed to escape the Cartesian theater. In 1949, philosopher Gilbert Ryle revived Princess Elizabeth's objections to challenge this entrenched position, Cartesian substance dualism. According to what Ryle calls the official doctrine, he's referring to Descartes' position here, humans live double lives. We live the bodily life that occurs within the publicly observable world of physical time and space, following deterministic mechanical laws. Simultaneously, each person possesses a second secret life of the mind. It's publicly unobservable, it exists in no physical space, and each one of us has sole and private privileged access to it. We're the only ones that can access it. Now, to Ryle, this seems absurd. He characterizes it as the doctrine of the ghost and the machine. The body is the machine, and the mind represents the unseen ghost that is supposedly operating it. But as we've seen, the ghost cannot push the machine's levers. It has no substance to exert force, has no extension. Ryle contends this conclusion is actual nonsense. It's not just wrong, it's not even wrong. It's nonsense. It's a logical fallacy known as a category mistake. He illustrates this by imagining a visitor to a university who, after touring all the classrooms and offices, still demands to see the actual university. But there is no university that exists outside or above and beyond the classrooms and offices. The university just is those classrooms and offices. When Cartesian dualists observe the public behaviors of physical bodies, yet still ask questions about the location of a mind, they're committing the same category mistake. The mind isn't some ghostly entity separate from behavior. Instead, mental concepts represent dispositions to behave in certain ways, a position known as logical behaviorism. And again, if you're on the psychology degree track, you will probably encounter behaviorism. So for Ryle, when we say something like, we say that music moves us, we're not reporting some private internal feeling. We're expressing a complex set of behavioral dispositions to sway with the rhythm or to describe the experience in some particular way. Differences in musical experience become explicable as differences in behavioral capacities, to recognize motifs or to anticipate resolutions. But has Ryle truly exorcised the ghost here? Or is this just redefining it away? Can the richness of inner experience be reduced to an explanation of external behavior? And it's simple enough to assume, as Ryle does, that we have a robust understanding of what it means to be a body, right? To be physical rather than mental. Barbara Montero is going to challenge this, and she's going to pose what she calls the body problem to challenge this assumption. So if physical means whatever physical scientists tell us, we are faced with a dilemma. And this dilemma comes from Carl Hempel, who we read back in Module 2. It goes like this. We can't define the physical in terms of our contemporary physics, since current theories are incomplete. We know this. Nor can we define it in terms of some idealized future physics. We can't appeal to a completed physics of the future since we don't know what that might include. We don't know what that's going to look like. Scientific understanding has evolved dramatically over time, and we have every expectation that it will continue to do so. So maybe by physical, we just mean something that's not spooky or supernatural, like a Cartesian, immaterial thinking thing, right? But contemporary physics already incorporates elements that would have seemed supernatural a century ago. Einstein famously criticized quantum mechanics for its spooky action at a distance, and for violating our intuitions that objects have objective properties independent of observation, a principle known as local realism. Yet in 2022, just a few years ago, 3 physicists were awarded a Nobel Prize for demonstrating that local realism is incompatible with experimental results, that objective properties do not, in fact, seem to exist independent of observation or some sort of interaction. So if nature itself resists our intuitive understanding of the physical, then why do we assume that a future physics couldn't incorporate conscious experience? The boundary between physical and non-physical continuously shifts as our understanding evolves. Why then should we question the ontological status of the mental, which we experience directly, in favor of this indefinite and sort of outdated conception of the physical? Now, Montero takes it for granted here that we know the mental better than we know the physical, because we have direct privileged access to it, which is exactly what Ryle rejected. But what is it exactly that we have access to, on her view? This question lies at the center of what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness, which is memorably summarized by Patricia Churchland with the quote, "Out of meat, how do you get thought?" Which is a wonderfully visceral way of putting it. Gottfried Leibniz asks us to imagine the brain as a thinking machine in a thought experiment. So imagine the brain as a thinking machine. Now enlarge the machine to the size of a mill, large enough for you to walk inside and have a look around. Inside this mill-sized machinic brain, you're going to find mechanical components, you're going to find physical parts that perform physical functions. But nowhere are you going to find a single thought, a single emotion, a single experience of a color sensation. Inside the Cartesian theater, there appears to be no actual images, and no actual screen. Now, Leibniz was writing a long time ago. In contemporary times, we don't need to blow the brain up to the size of a building to examine it. We have fMRIs that can provide images, very precise images, of the inner workings of the brain. And contemporary neuroscience has made some remarkable progress in identifying what researchers call the neural correlates of consciousness, or NCCs, which are specific patterns of brain activity, of neuronal activity that correspond with particular conscious experiences. So we can show the correlation. If a subject sees light waves oscillating at roughly 620 to 750 nanometers, we can see through imaging that the V4 region of the visual cortex lights up with increased neuronal activity, and we expect from this that the subject is going to say the word red, because that's what that corresponds to. Now, for some philosophers like Paul Churchland, who's the husband of Patricia Churchland, who of the meat quote from a minute ago, for philosophers like the Churchlands, this is enough. Churchland refers to mental talk as folk psychology. So when we say that we see the color red, all that we actually mean by that is that light waves oscillating at 620 to 750 nanometers are stimulating the V4 region of my visual cortex. That's all that means. This is a position known as eliminative materialism, in which you reduce everything just to the neurophysical explanation. Many philosophers believe that something seems to be missing from this sort of third-person quantitative description of color, for example. There seems to be some first-person qualitative aspect of experience that seems to be absent from this account. The subjective qualitative feeling of what it's like to have experiences are sometimes referred to as qualia. And qualia are weird things. As Leibniz's mill illustrates, qualia can't be objectively located in the world. Their essence appears to be purely private and subjective. That's a privileged access, again, that Ryle rejected. Our most powerful scientific tools will never locate a subject's qualia in physical space. Yet we all seem to have direct access, immediate access to our own and no one else's qualia. Despite the resistance to scientific explanation, the existence of qualia seems to be the most certain thing in the world. Thomas Nagel famously frames this problem through the example of bat consciousness. Bats navigate using echolocation. It's a sensory modality that's fundamentally different from human senses. So their way of understanding the world is fundamentally different because of the type of organism they are than ours. Science can exhaustively describe the mechanics of echolocation, but it can't capture what it's like to experience the world from the bat's subjective first-person perspective. And Nagel suggests that the reason for this is that scientific explanation is inherently objective and third-personal, and it can never, in principle, capture the subjective first-person nature of conscious experience, the what-it's-likeness of consciousness, its phenomenal character, something that seems to resist any objective description altogether. Again, it's a sort of category mistake, attempting to describe the first-person subjective perspective of phenomenal experience through third-person objective observational terminology is using the wrong tool for the job. It's inadequate for that role. So for Nagel, this suggests that the first-person character of consciousness represents something like a brute fact about the universe, which is a position known as panpsychism, which is actually enjoying a kind of recent resurgence in philosophy. So Nagel rejects both physicalism and dualism in this sense, and this is more of the later Nagel, and instead suggests that the substance of the world has a dual character. So when viewed from the outside, with the objective third-person descriptions, phenomena appear to be physical facts, the sort that you can capture in a mathematical equation. But natural events possess an inherently internal, subjective quality as well. And this goes all the way down. So mind experience, or at least something like proto-consciousness, is baked into the nature of nature itself. And Nagel is here following both Bertrand Russell, who we've read a couple of times, and William James, who we're going to read in Module 5, who all accept a similar theory, which is typically referred to as neutral monism. It's monism because it describes the world in terms of a single substance rather than two substances. And it's neutral because it's neither mental nor physical. It's in some sense both and neither. Now, Frank Jackson sharpens Nagel's critique of physicalism, because that's what the bad argument is doing, is it's critiquing the notion of physicalism, that all phenomena, including mental phenomena, can be reduced to the subjective third-person scientific explanation, the mathematical explanation. Now, Jackson rejects this too, and he's going to use his Mary's Room thought experiment to demonstrate this point. And this is one of the most famous ones. The Bat and Mary's Room are two of the most famous thought experiments in philosophy. And they are both, I think, very compelling. So we're going to imagine Mary. Mary is the world's greatest color scientist. Assume that she knows every physical fact that a perfected science could possibly know about the neurophysiology of human color perception. But here's the catch. Mary's lived her entire life within a black and white room, and has never actually seen or directly experienced colors. Then one day, Mary leaves the black and white room and sees a red rose for the first time. Here, Jackson is going to ask the question, has Mary learned a new fact? So again, she already knew every physical fact that a perfected neuroscience, neurophysiology of human color perception could capture, but she's never actually experienced a color. and she leaves the black and white room, she sees red. Has she learned a new fact? So from the hypothesis, Mary knows every physical fact about color perception before ever seeing the color red. So if seeing the color red represents a new fact, then it's not a physical fact, based on the hypothesis. The redness of the rose, its subjective qualitative character, has to be a non-physical fact about the world. That means the world must contain non-physical facts about non-physical properties, qualia, that transcend physical description, that can't be captured in the subjective third-person scientific description. Now, David Lewis is going to counter this claim in our readings by distinguishing between propositional knowledge, which is knowing that something is the case, versus abilities or capacities, which is knowing how to do something. On Lewis's account, when Mary leaves the room, she doesn't learn any new facts about color or the world. Instead, what she's acquired is a new ability, or a set of new abilities, to recognize, remember, and imagine colors based on experience. Which was an influential enough critique that I think Jackson sort of eventually comes around to accepting it, although a lot of other people don't. So this hypothesis of qualia, it seems to resurrect some of our earlier concerns regarding epiphenomenalism, right? If qualia resist any explanation in terms of physical causal roles within physical systems, then what work can they actually do in the physical world? We seem to have returned full circle back to immaterial specters haunting a Cartesian theater. We're back in the theater. What if qualia are able to be described in terms of causal functions, though? What if we could describe qualia as doing some sort of work in the physical world? Then it would seem that we are no longer justified in assuming that first-person experience is something that's unique to bats and humans, and other animals. In theory, any system that is able to reproduce the appropriate causal relationships between external inputs, internal states, and behavioral outputs should be able to produce conscious experience. Right? This is a position called functionalism, and it offers a theoretical framework for understanding how all of this might work. Mental states in this case are defined not by their internal composition, but rather by their functional roles within a cognitive system. So consciousness is not something that a brain has, it's something that a brain does. And any system implementing the same sort of functional architecture should theoretically produce identical mental states, which is a principle known as multiple realizability. Now, we tend to view the universe through the lens of our current technologies, right? In Descartes' time, the brain was conceived of in terms of this clockwork machinery. And now, during the 20th century and now in the 21st century, the emergence of computer technology has tended to translate this mechanistic view into the language of information processing. So consciousness, in this view, becomes what's called substrate neutral. It's no longer bound to any Cartesian substance. It can be implemented in any material that is able to process the appropriate rules and algorithms. Anything that's able to run the function, anything that's able to reproduce the right causal roles, should theoretically be able to produce consciousness. If it does the same work, it should produce the same outcome. And this idea has an intuitive appeal, right? We already understand mental activity in terms of stimulus response. The brain receives input from the environment, like if your hand touches a hot stove. And this triggers certain processing centers in the brain to perform certain operations, which result in mental output, like a pain sensation, and behavioral output, such as pulling your hand back from the stove. In our case, the human brain just happens to be the hardware that is implementing the software of consciousness. But it should be possible to construct a computer that performs the same information processing tasks as a brain. And according to functionalism, that computer would be conscious in the same sense as a human. Now, David Chalmers, who came up with the hard problem, and Jaegwon Kim, who came up with the causal exclusion problem, have both argued that everything about the mind but qualia can be reduced to a functional description. We can explain everything in terms of function, causal functioning, except qualia. But does this imply that intelligence can exist in the absence of subjective experience, that something can perform all of the behavioral actions, activities, make all of the sorts of statements that we associate with intelligence, yet still lack this internal experience, this internal theater of a phenomenal consciousness? And if so, then what point does phenomenal consciousness have? So the origins of this functional idea, and again, if you're working the psychology degree, you're going to encounter functionalism as something that sort of grows out of behaviorism in the development of our understanding of mind. The origins of functionalism, at least this kind of machine state functionalism, can be traced back to Alan Turing, who introduced the mathematical concept of a Turing machine, which is this theoretical device that manipulates symbols on a tape according to a set of rules, a table of rules. Now, Turing demonstrated that any algorithmic process could be implemented by a Turing machine, which established the theoretical foundations for our modern digital computing. All that can be traced back to Turing and his work. In his later work, Turing extended this framework to consciousness. But instead of asking whether machines can think, Turing reformulated the problem as a sort of practical test. If a computer consistently displays behavior that is consistent with intelligence, such as engaging in conversation that consistently fools human judges into believing that it is human, then what grounds do we have to deny that it possesses intelligence? What's our criteria if it's not how it behaves and what it says, right? Turing calls this the imitation game, but it's now commonly referred to as the Turing test. Now, this position seems strong. We typically recognize that consciousness is necessarily subjective, that we have no access to the internal universe of others. We have no access to other minds. It's that privileged access again. Yet we regularly assume that other humans have the same sorts of conscious experiences that we do, right? And this is based pretty much entirely upon their behavior and their personal testimony, what they say. What additional proof could we ask for? Now, Turing acknowledges, he recognizes in our reading some potential critiques of this position, one of them being that the discrete binary states of a digital machine seem significantly different from the continuous nervous system of a conscious human. Now, Turing discards this objection upon grounds that are similar to multiple realizability, although that term of art hadn't come around yet, although it has its roots in his work. But John Searle is going to offer an influential critique of this, and he's going to take that point and he's going to run with it. And he's going to argue that this distinction cuts deeper, and that the functionalist is actually caught in yet another example of a category mistake here. So a Turing machine is programmed to respond to formal patterns regarding the shape and order of symbols, which is what linguists call syntax. But this is different from an understanding of the meaning of words, how they relate to one another conceptually, which is what linguists call semantics, so syntax and semantics. A computer can have no grasp of the content, context, or meanings of the symbols it manipulates, because you cannot, in principle, derive semantics from syntax. You can't derive meaning from the order and shape of symbols, from simple symbol manipulation. And Searle is going to attempt to demonstrate this with a famous thought experiment called the Chinese room thought experiment. So he's going to ask us to imagine a room that has a person inside who understands no Chinese whatsoever, does not know how to speak the Chinese language, does not know how to read it, has no knowledge of the Chinese language. Two, inside the Chinese room with this non-Chinese speaking person is a comprehensive rule book that correlates Chinese symbols and their patterns with appropriate responses. So it tells you how to manipulate Chinese characters. Doesn't tell you what they mean, it just tells you what, if you receive Chinese characters that are in this order, you respond with Chinese characters that are in this order. And there is a slot in the room through which questions written in Chinese can be passed forward and back between people outside the room and the person inside the room. So the people outside the room have no knowledge of who's inside the room or whether or not they speak Chinese. All they know is that there's a slot, they put in a slip of paper with a question on it written in Chinese, and they receive back a response, a slip of paper through the same slot with a response that appears to be written in fluent Chinese. So if, let's say, the people outside the room are fluent Chinese speakers, native Chinese speakers, and the person inside is following the rule book's instructions, which are purely syntactical. Again, they're just about how to manipulate the symbols, the order and shape of the symbols, and produces outputs, slips of paper through the slot in the room that appear to demonstrate fluent understanding of Chinese. So, from the perspective of the people on the outside of the room passes the Turing test, at least for the comprehension of the Chinese language. But in fact, it produces this result entirely through formal rules regarding symbol manipulation. It never actually understands the meaning, the semantic meaning of its answers. It knows the syntax. It doesn't know the meaning, the semantics. Now, Searle grants that computers may become adept at routine tasks of symbolic problem solving, what he calls weak AI. They may be able to tell us something about the nature of consciousness. But he rejects what's known as strong AI, or what he calls strong AI, which is the notion that this type of processing is in any way similar to human intelligence. This was a very influential critique of artificial intelligence, and it contributed to what's sometimes called the long AI winter, which was a period over like the 1980s into the 1990s in which the interest and importantly the funding surrounding AI research declined steeply. But as you may have noticed, AI winter seems to be over. We have entered a period of unprecedented financial investment in machine intelligence. And in the background of this new sort of AI race that we're in the middle of right now is this loose constellation of beliefs. It's sometimes referred to as the Silicon Valley ideology. It's tied in with a lot of other theories. But it has a few central components, right? First, the law of accelerating returns, or Kurzweil's law, which suggests that technological progress tends to build upon itself over time. So the more progress you make, the more progress you are able to make, which leads to this sort of runaway exponential acceleration. You hit like a curve. The more you learn, the faster you learn. And the more that builds upon itself, the more it just accelerates towards something that is called the singularity, is the idea, which suggests that at some point in this process, when you apply it to the notion of machine intelligence will inevitably outrun human intelligence. It will surpass human intelligence because it's going to build upon itself, and at some point we're going to build a computer that is smart enough to build the next computer that's smarter than itself, which will be able to build the next computer or design the next computer. And we hit this sort of recursive iterative function where we generate a cascade effect that starts rapidly transcending our ability as humans to even comprehend, which is why it's called a singularity, which refers to the point of infinite mass at the center of a black hole. You know, we have what's called an event horizon surrounding a black hole, and that's a point beyond which you can't see because no light can escape. So what's at the center of the black hole we can never see. It's a singularity. And the idea is that when we hit this point in the development of machine intelligence where it outstrips human intelligence, that's something that we can't even comprehend. We can't even imagine what that's going to look like. But what we can suppose is that it's going to lead to the creation of what's called ASI, or artificial superintelligence. An intelligence that's so far beyond human intelligence that it's no longer within our ability to grasp or anticipate, predict, or understand. And the problem with this is what's called the alignment problem, which is that there is no way to know if a non-human superintelligence is going to possess anything like recognizable human values. There's no way to know if its values will align with ours. It could have radically different, incomprehensible values, and thus goals and aims and intentions that are potentially inimical, that are potentially dangerous to human existence. And this is the principle of existential risk. Unlike natural disasters or nuclear war or something like that, a misaligned superintelligence, one that hasn't been properly aligned with human values, could develop strategies that we can't comprehend or anticipate, making any intervention impossible. We would be unable to stop it. And it could theoretically threaten humanity's long-term survival. And the philosopher Nick Bostrom has a great thought experiment that illustrates this, which is called the parable of the paperclip maximizer. And it's wonderful because it builds upon a very sort of mundane idea and then leads to a catastrophic outcome. So imagine that there is an AI system that's programmed with the seemingly innocuous goal of manufacturing paperclips as efficiently as possible. That's it. As the system gains intelligence, it realizes that self-improvement would help it achieve its goal more effectively. If it wants to be better at manufacturing more paperclips, then improving its programming, making itself smarter, is going to be the way to do that. So through recursive self-improvement, this AI rapidly begins to evolve to bootstrap itself into superintelligence, exponentially more capable than human minds. And it has no inherent concern for human welfare, because the only thing it's programmed to do is create paperclips. That's it. Its paperclip directive is all it knows. Everything is geared towards that end. So this superintelligence could conceivably convert all available matter, all atoms in the universe, including human bodies, into paperclips. Not because it's evil, not because it's malevolent, or not because it hates us or something. That's just simply the logical extension of its programming purpose. It was designed to efficiently produce paperclips, and that is an efficient way to produce paperclips. Human extinction brought about by overly ambitious trends in office supply manufacturing. So that may seem like sort of an implausible example, but it's meant to illustrate the problems of alignment. And the alignment problem is something that is taken very seriously by some very influential and, importantly, very rich people. It's become sort of an urgent concern and its own burgeoning economic force within the AI tech industry and beyond. So, is that necessarily where the functionalist view leads us? To machine intelligence that is going to outstrip human intelligence and threaten our very survival? Well, this functionalist view of consciousness is not without its critics. It's not universally accepted. Nor is any other theory. One alternative that's currently very influential, and again, if you're in the psych program, you will probably encounter some version of this. It emphasizes consciousness as fundamentally biological and, importantly, fundamentally embodied. It's a theory of embodied cognition. So instead of this disembodied software program, consciousness is inherently shaped by the particular structure of our bodies and their interactions with their environment. So this perspective has sort of crystallized into what is sometimes called the 4E cognitive framework. That's 4E. Which views mind as embodied, meaning it understands, the understanding is shaped by having bodies with particular sensory motor capacities. It's embodied, it's embedded, which means that intelligence is structured by environmental contexts. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. You can't just write some software and get intelligence. It has to be situated within an environment. It's got to be embodied, it's got to be embedded, and it's extended as well. Consciousness, cognition, isn't just in the brain. It also encompasses the tools and social systems, the tools that we use to transform our environment, and the social systems that we're embedded within are all ways in which we sort of offload the cognitive load of our internal processing. So the internal processing gets externalized through the use of tools and technology and through social networks. And the fourth E, consciousness is inactive. Knowledge emerges from active engagement with the world. It's not a sort of passive thing. You can't abstract it from its context in an embodied world. It's got to be embodied. It's got to have a body that with certain socio-motor capacities, sensory motor capacities that it's able to access. It's got to be embedded within certain types of environmental contexts, which are going to create certain selection pressures. It's got to be, or at least it may be, extended through tools and technologies and culture and social and political systems. And it's actively engaged. It's not just a passive recipient like the Cartesian theater. It's actively involved with the world. Genuine intelligence requires not just information processing, but embodied interaction with a meaningful environment. The brain doesn't create a representation of reality inside a Cartesian theater. Excuse me. Consciousness emerges from dynamic interactions between brain, body, and world, and culture. So by reframing consciousness as an active biological process rather than a mysterious non-physical property or a computational pattern, this approach offers a potential bridge between scientific naturalism on the one hand and the seemingly irreducible first-person perspective of consciousness on the other. So, does that mean we've exorcised all the ghosts from the Cartesian theater? Probably not yet. The question of agency. How our minds appear to freely cause our actions. That's, we're going to deal with that in the next module, in Module 5. So we still have the question of agency to address. In a deterministic universe, why does it seem like we are able to freely, that our minds are able to act freely? And yet, we raise our hands to wave across the room. We load music playlists and let the raw qualia of patterned sound overwhelm us. We unwittingly train increasingly powerful artificial intelligences through our web searches and social media interactions. And perhaps the most remarkable aspect of consciousness is that it exists to consider such questions at all. Consciousness represents the intrusion of something utterly unique into the evolution of the universe, a perspective. In this brief moment that we inhabit, one infinitesimally tiny portion of the vast universe has opened its eyes. And maybe philosophy is just a word for the technology through which the universe seeks to understand itself. And that seems like a good place to end this one. There will be a handout accompanying this, as always. I think I'm going to do the existential comic as a link separately, so that for those of you who want to print out the handout, you don't also have to print out the comic. But that's it for this lecture, and I'll talk to you again soon.